Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Pfaff Select 4.2. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get started using your machine. Okay, to start with, if you want to do just straight stitch or zigzag, you push this G button. Now, if that's not, none of the buttons are pushed, make sure you select G. Think G for general sewing. There you go. Now, whether you're going to be doing zigzag or straight stitch has to do with this knob up here. If it's on 0, you're going to be sewing straight. If it's on 2, 3, 4, or 5, it's going to be sewing in zigzag, either wider or narrower. Now, you can make it shorter, your stitch length shorter or longer with this dial down here. Now, if you move this, you can see there's not as many lines between the numbers. When you have it between 2 and 3, there's more lines. That means that that's your general all-purpose stitch length. If you want to sew really tight short stitches, you can do that right there, moving it further down here. And here, this is the area that you'd use for sewing buttonholes. You can see how close those stitches are to each other. Okay, so we're going to keep it right here between 2 and 3. And that little notch there is your indicator as to where you are. We'll move that down right about like that. Okay, then you can move your needle to one side. So if we're sewing just a straight stitch, which is what it is on 0, I can move my needle to one side here. Now it's on the right, and you can see that little dot there. That kind of corresponds to where the needle comes down in the stitch hole in the foot. And so if you move it the other way, you can see now it's on the other side. Okay, so let's just leave that right in the middle for now. Okay, to start sewing, let me use this one here. Okay, start sewing. We got our back stitch button right here. Start sewing like this. Let it up. And with this machine, you can stop, push this down, let it up, and there you go. Now, when you're done sewing, before you take your fabric out of there, you're going to need to use your hand wheel to make sure the take-up lever is up. Right now, I don't see it right there. So if I simply stopped with my needle up, see, it's hard to get my fabric out of there. I'm going to show you why. We open this up and look under here. See the bobbin case? It has some of the thread, that's the top thread, coming part way around. For each stitch, it pulls a loop of thread around the bobbin. That's how it forms the stitch. But right now, it's not done making a stitch. When we move the hand wheel so that take-up lever peeks up there, now it's done making a stitch, and we can pull our fabric out of there easily. So when you're done sewing, make sure that peeks up there. Now, if you've got it way up here, notice the needle starting to come down already. And it could scratch across your needle. Your fabric could scratch across your needle if that's down enough. So you can move it backwards a little bit to get it in the right place. This is where it should be when it stops. It's never going to stop exactly in the right place. I mean, you might get it occasionally just right, but most of the time you're going to have to move your hand wheel a little bit to get it to stop, get the take-up lever to stop in that position. The take-up lever, its purpose is to take up the slack in the stitch every time that makes that loop of thread, loop of top thread around the bobbin. It takes up that slack and forms a nice even stitch on both sides of the fabric. Got a thread cutter right over here. Okay, so for zigzagging the edge of your fabric, we've got fabric that tends to want to fray. You want to use a zigzag, same button here, which is your G for general sewing. But this time, we want to make it a little bit wider. Let's go all the way up to 5 for this loosely woven fabric. Now, as I move my needle down, I want to make sure that the needle is just past the edge of the fabric here. And then the next stitch is going to be in the fabric. And I can do a back stitch to kind of seal the end of that, beginning and end of that seam. And that's where I'm watching, right there. Now, there is another way that you can do a zigzag, because here you have to kind of steer it just right to make sure that that doesn't get too far past the edge of the fabric or into the edge of the fabric. And that's where we use this little foot right here. This is actually the foot that you would use to do a blind hem, and that's like this stitch here or this stitch here. Blind hem is where you can hardly see any stitches at all, or maybe no stitches at all on the outside of your garment. The stitching is done in the inside. This can also be used for overcasting the edge of the fabric. Now, if you look really carefully, you can see there's a little wire there. So if we have shirt weight fabric and we zigzag the edge, we might get a kind of a scrunched up edge like this. But if we use this foot here, it's going to leave enough slack. That wire there is going to leave enough slack in the top thread so that we get a nice flat edge. I'll show you how that's done. So to start with, let's put everything right back to neutral. Take this foot off, and this little red guide can be moved back and forth using this dial here. I want to have it right there, even with the wire right there. The wire is going to correspond to where the edge of the fabric is. Put that on. Now in this case, remember I used the needle position? We want to have the needle position so it's on the right. That means as it does a zigzag, the zigzag is going to widen or narrower, get wider or narrower to the left, but remain the same on the right. So we want the right hand drop of the needle always to be past that little wire. So make sure you look up here. This is what you want. You want G, and you want this needle position. Now we're going to need to make this wider. I would go, well, let's go all the way up to 5. That'll work. Okay. And to make sure, once you're just kind of getting started on this, let's just hand walk a couple of stitches to make sure everything's fine. And it is. It's working great. So the edge of your fabric should be right next to the red guide. That's where you should be watching as you start sewing. You can put a little bit of a back stitch in the beginning and then keep sewing. And once you get down to the end of your fabric, you can do another little back stitch, just a little bit, just a couple stitches one way or the other. And remember, once we're done sewing, get that the take-up lever up there. Now, when you take your fabric out of there, the wire is holding the last few stitches, so pull your fabric to the back and it'll slide right off. See how nice and flat that is? That's because we've used the blind hem foot number 3, for making the overcast, and we've moved our needle position to the right. Okay. So what if you wanted to do applique? Applique is where you have a piece of fabric and then you're putting that on top of another piece of fabric. Well, applique is really pretty easy. Let's leave that right there. And I'm going to make it a little bit narrower, but I'm going to shorten my stitch length just almost to the buttonhole area. So let's see, I'm going to get a yellow piece and put that on my blue piece. And for the applique, we want to use, I don't happen to have it handy right now, but that's okay. I'm going to put this one on. This will work. The applique foot, they suggest you use the foot number 1. It's out of my reach right now, but that's all right. Okay, now, normally for applique, I would have my fabric freshly cut so there wouldn't be any little pokies out here. But what we want to do is we want to have the right-hand swing of the needle go just past the edge of the fabric, and the left-hand swing of the needle go into the fabric. And you can make it as wide or narrow as you want. So notice what I'm doing. I'm doing a little bit of experimentation. So you want to do that before you actually sew on your fabric, on your finished project. Get everything set up just the way it should be, and then take it slow, and there you go. I'm going around corners here. I want my last stitch to be just on the point of my applique fabric. Actually, I can take one more stitch and make it really nice and neat. Turn a corner. Now notice it's a little bit not quite as dense as I want it to be, so I'm going to make that a little bit shorter stitch length. There we go. Okay, so that's how we would do applique using the zigzag feature. Okay, so for regular sewing, and I would always suggest this unless you're going to applique the next time you sew, once you're done sewing for the day, put everything back to normal sewing, right in the middle, right down here to 0, so that way you're ready to go and you start to sew. It's going to just sew a regular straight stitch. So that's getting started on this machine. There's a lot of stitches that you can do, a lot of different ways you can do these buttons. I'm going to show you how to do a buttonhole pretty soon here. We have other videos on this machine and on other machines here on our Montevilla YouTube channel. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.